The pancreas is a large gland that sits just posterior to your stomach in the abdominal cavity. The organ has regions known as the head of the pancreas, body, and tail of the pancreas. The pancreas plays two vital roles. One in the endocrine system, which we're going to discuss today, but also in the digestive system, which we'll learn more about when we get to that system later on the semester. But we're going to see then that the pancreas produces a number of digestive enzymes that are delivered into the small intestine. So this function of the pancreas is an exocrine function. Exocrine glands produce some sort of secretion and then deliver that secretion using ducts. And this makes up about 99% of the pancreas. Therefore, only about 1% of the pancreas is endocrine tissue. That tissue is found in small little patches throughout the pancreas known as pancreatic islets. An islet is a small little island. In these drawings, again, this is not a drawing of the pancreas. This is a drawing of just a single pancreatic islet surrounded by the exocrine glands of the pancreas. Inside the pancreatic islet, there's a number of endocrine cells. Alpha cells, beta cells, delta cells, and F cells. We're going to focus on the alpha cells and the beta cells because those are the cells that produce the hormones that regulate your blood sugar throughout the day. The alpha cells produce a hormone known as glucagon. Beta cells produce the hormone insulin. These two are another example of antagonistic hormones, meaning they do the opposite. What they do is together regulate your blood sugar. So if you notice, the stimulus is completely opposite for each of these hormones. The stimulus for the production of glucagon is low blood sugar, whereas the stimulus for insulin production is high blood sugar. So as a response, these hormones do the opposite. So if decreased blood sugar stimulates glucagon production, glucagon will result in raising blood sugar. It does this by targeting the liver. The liver can produce glucose one of two ways. It can break down stored glucose, which is known as glycogen. So glycogen is a polysaccharide that is broken down into glucose, which is a monosaccharide. This process is called glycogenolysis, breaking glycogen down. It can also convert other nutrients, like some of our amino acids, into glucose. This process is known as gluconeogenesis, producing glucose from something other than a carbohydrate. So, this function helps keep your blood sugar from dropping dangerously low. For instance, if you go a certain length of time without consuming carbohydrates, your blood sugar drops very low. Let's say it drops to 70 milligrams per deciliter. That's a fairly low blood sugar. In order to keep that blood sugar from dropping even below 70, glucagon stimulates the liver. Let's say you just ate that meal, and now because your meal has carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. But after a meal, that blood sugar continues to go up above what you need. So when you have high blood sugar, that stimulates beta cells to produce insulin. Insulin targets a number of cells in the body, not just the liver. It targets almost every cell of the body because insulin helps tell those cells to take up glucose. And when cells take up glucose, that ultimately lowers blood sugar. So the target for insulin is many cells of the body. Insulin will promote an accelerated transport of glucose into those cells. Those cells will convert glucose into glycogen if they want to store that glucose, like the liver and muscle. Or they will convert that glucose into fat, so that's known as lipogenesis, and maybe send that fat out to adipose tissue. So if you think of the liver can do this. The liver can take glucose and convert it to glycogen and store it for later. Or the liver can take glucose and convert it to fat and send it out for storage at adipose tissue. Other cells will just take that glucose in and use it for cellular respiration for their source of energy. Once we understand that, we can better understand diabetes mellitus. On the right, we have a fancy figure going over what we just did on the previous slide, just depicted a little differently. Here on this side, it talks about low blood sugar stimulating glucagon production from alpha cells. The target being liver cells. The action at the liver is to convert glycogen into glucose or form glucose from other things like lactic acid and amino acid. Ultimately, the liver produces glucose and releases glucose into the bloodstream to raise blood sugar. On the right side of this figure, we have high blood glucose or hyperglycemia. That stimulates beta cells to produce insulin. Insulin targets a variety of body cells to take up glucose into the cell, convert it to glycogen, and possibly synthesize fatty acids from that glucose. Those functions will collectively lower the blood sugar levels. Now let's look at type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is often called juvenile because it's an early onset or insulin dependent. The cause of type 1 diabetes is the loss or destruction of beta cells. This is believed to be an autoimmune reaction where the immune system destroys the beta cells. If the beta cells are destroyed, the body cannot produce enough insulin. If the body does not produce enough insulin, it has a hard time getting cells to take up glucose. So the result is high blood sugar coupled with low cellular glucose. The high blood sugar can be toxic in the bloodstream, and if cells don't get their glucose, they often have to rely on other sources of energy, like fatty acids. That might sound fine, but if the body uses too much fatty acids for energy, the result are byproducts called ketones, and those ketones can often cause acidosis. Some signs and symptoms of type 1 diabetes: frequent urination because of the loss of glucose into urine. When an individual has really high blood sugar, some of that glucose spills out into the urine, and that pulls water out of the body. When you pull water out of the body, you're often very thirsty. These individuals often have hunger and weight loss. Type 2 diabetes is much different than type 1 in that it's usually a later in life onset, and it's known as insulin resistance because the problem is not with the production of insulin, The problem is the target cells. The target cells become resistant to insulin. They stop listening to insulin. Why would they do this? Because there's been years and years of high insulin production in response to high glucose intake. So poor diet over years can contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. The result is very similar: high blood sugar, thirst, urination, fatigue. These individuals can get sores, can contribute to heart disease, and diabetic retinopathy, which is a vision problem. So 2 types of diabetes mellitus. We should be familiar with the two, the similarities and the differences. Finally, we're going to go really quick through some other organs that produce hormones. Now, these organs often aren't thought of as only being part of the endocrine system. They often play roles in other systems. For instance, the ovaries and testes are involved in your reproductive systems, but they are targets of hormones and producers of hormones. We're going to spend much more time talking about ovaries and testes later on in the semester when we get to the reproductive systems. But you should be aware that the ovaries produce estrogens and progesterone, relaxin, and a hormone known as inhibin. For now, we just need to know that these are produced by the ovaries, and collectively they regulate the female reproductive system. For testes, they produce 2 hormones, testosterone and also inhibin. And again, we're going to talk more about these hormones at the end of the semester, but for now we should know that the testes produce these 2 hormones and they are involved in the male reproductive system. Finally, there's a number of other organs that produce hormones. These are also somewhat lower priority for now because we're going to get to a lot of these later on in the semester. But your digestive system, your GI tract, produces gastrin, secretin, and cholecystokinin. For now, we should know that these are produced by the GI tract to help regulate the GI tract. The details we'll worry about later. The placenta produces a very important hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin. This hormone is actually the target of pregnancy tests because early on, an embryo produces this hormone. Estrogen and progesterone are produced by the placenta. These hormones during pregnancy help maintain that pregnancy. Kidneys produce a couple hormones: renin, erythropoietin, and calcitriol. Renin we'll worry about another day. EPO, or erythropoietin, we'll worry about probably next chapter when we talk about blood and red blood cell production. Calcitriol we've mentioned already. Calcitriol is the active form of vitamin D. If you recall, parathyroid hormone stimulates the production of calcitriol. The heart produces a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide. We'll worry about it when we get to the cardiovascular system, but it helps decrease blood pressure. Finally, adipose tissue produces a hormone called leptin. Leptin has been found to suppress the appetite, and as an aside, it seems to increase the levels of FSH and LH activity, bringing on early puberty. So that's the end of the endocrine system. Good luck studying.